Welcome back. I just wanted to run through a quick setup for taking SCA-friendly payments with Laravel. Laravel is a really popular PHP framework. We haven't done very much with it for office hours, so I want to quickly run through how you might just set up a basic payment intent to collect a one-time payment in an SCA-ready way with Laravel. I'm really brand new to Laravel. I've just been introduced to it, so we're going to kind of walk through that, and as I'm going, I'll show kind of how I would approach learning a new framework or learning like some of the tools of the framework. Now, I've done a little bit of prep, so I've got like an idea of roughly how this is going to go, but I wanted to just show one, how to connect Laravel to Stripe to take a one-time payment, and two, how I might just explore the docs to learn about a framework. So I've already gone and installed the Laravel installer, which you can do with this command here. So I'm using Composer to globally require this Laravel installer. So you can run that, and that allows you to then say things like Laravel new jobs. So we're going to make a new Laravel application for creating a job posting for like a job site, and it'll have each job will have a type and a title. And we'll be able to validate that data with some of the Laravel tools. And then if the data is invalid, then we'll return, and then otherwise we will create and confirm payment intents. So the way that we'll do this is we will create a couple of views, a couple of blade views within Laravel, and then we will use Stripe.js on the client to tokenize payment details and handle SCA authentication for us. So we need to do a couple of things before we get started. So the first is I need to set up a database. So I'm going to say touch, and then I'm just going to create this new database as a database.sqlite. And then we need to update our environment variables to point at that database. So I'm going to go in here and go to our DB connection, and this is just going to be called SQLite. So the SQLite connection really just uses it uses the file, so we don't have to worry about too much. So here, office hours, and then I called this the jobs application, and then it's in database.sqlite. Okay, so that should be our DB connection. The next thing we want to do is add our Stripe keys here. So I'm going to say Stripe key is going to be my publishable key, and Stripe secret is going to be my secret key. Now, when you go to publish, or when you go to deploy this to production, these keys will be different. You'll want your live publishable key and your live test key, but for now I'm just using my test keys here. Okay, so that is how we are going to set up our environment variables. The next step is we want to make sure that our API keys are being set when we launch Laravel. And so they have this tool here that I've discovered in config. So you can go to config, services, and then add your own service down here. So I'm going to call it Stripe. And the Stripe thing is just going to have a key, which is our publishable key. And we'll say env Stripe key, and then we'll do the same with secret. This seems to be the pattern with Laravel. Okay. All right, so we are spinning up the keys for the service. Now we can access these with config with services.stripe.key, services.stripe.secret. Okay, and then the next thing we want to do is add this into a controller. All right, so we got to go make a controller. So how do we do that? There's this shortcuts, Laravel, artisan, make controller. I forget what it's called. Let's see. So there was a helpful article that I came across that had a bunch of shortcuts, but let's just see. Okay, so it's actually just PHP artisan make controller, and then the name of the controller, job controller. Okay, so we are going to make a new controller that just lists all the jobs, and then we have a way to create a new job if someone wants to buy a job posting. So they're going to say that they're hiring a Rails developer, or they're hiring a Laravel developer, or they're hiring a machine learning expert. So that'll just be like the title of the job. So here, if we go now into HTTP controllers, we have a job controller created. That's great. Actually, it's not great because I want it to have all of the resource type stuff. So I forgot about that. So where is this? App, HTTP, controllers, job controller. So I want to try this again. So I'm going to use PHP artisan make controller, and then I want to say resource is resource. Let's see. All right, cool. So this created a bunch of methods for me. That's what I was looking for. And then the very first thing we want to do is like add an index route that returns a view of like jobs.index. So the resources are, or the views are stored here. I'm going to create a new jobs directory for all my job related views. I'm going to add index.blade.php. Okay, and so this is going to be like our H1 that has like jobs. You can have, there's like ways to use Blade to include the layout and all of that, but I'm not going to deal with any of that right now. I'm just going to make a link to jobs/new, which will be our create a job posting. Okay, so the next thing we need to do before we go test this out is add it to our routes. So if we go into web.php, routes/web.php, we can add a route here. And this is the route that is going to our controller. So what does this look like? Right. So we need to say like route get, and then the path to get the jobs indexed, and the path to the controller. So job controller at index. Okay. All right. So let's go fire this up. You run it with saying PHP artisan serve, and that will fire up your server. So we'll go to localhost 8000, and that's just kind of like the demo, whatever, the stuff that comes with it. And then if we go to /jobs, we should see the page that we just created. So this is the index page. We're going to click on create a job, and that's going to a page that does not exist yet. So let's go add the job create page. So back in our routes, we want to add a get route to jobs/new. And in Laravel, the convention is to call the create function here, I believe. So within the create function, we are again going to return a view this time. We will call it jobs.create. And we'll add a little bit more, create.blade.php. And in here, we want to have a little bit more HTML. I'm going to add my demo CSS. Okay, so this is just like a little bit of structure for the page. So in here, we want to add a form. And our form action is going to be to post all of the data eventually to /jobs. So we're going to need another action to store the job after we're done. But for now, like job create form. For now, we're just going to give the form an ID, and we're going to add this @CSRF blade helper function thing that's going to add a hidden. This will add a hidden input with the ID of the meta CSRF token that we can use when making requests, so they're protected from cross-site request forgery. So just to show you what that looks like, let's try to refresh this. Okay, so now we should have HTML for a form on the page. And all the form has right now is just this @CSRF sort of directive thing, and that adds an input, a hidden input with the name _token with the value for the CSRF token. So this is all that we have on our form so far. We need to add an input box for collecting the title of the job. We're going to add a way to collect the type of the job, which we can use to like calculate how much to charge for it. And then we're also going to add a button and some error handling, some error messaging. Okay, so the very next thing that I want to do here is add some of those elements. So I'm going to add a field set with a field for the job title, or I'll just call it title. And the ID will be title input. And the value, we'll just say like software engineer. And we'll add another field for the type. And this is going to be the job type. Now this job type, it could be radio buttons. It could be a select box. For now, I'm just going to make it an input to make it really easy. And we'll call this the type input. And the value will be like standard. Okay. And then we need a field to collect the credit card. So this is going to be, actually this is just going to be a div with the ID card element. Yeah, so I'm going to use Stripe.js to mount the card element in that field, and that will give me controls for collecting the card number, CVC, date, expiration date, etc. And this will also have a class of field. Okay, you can kind of style these however you want. And then finally, I want, or next, I want to have like an error messages div. That's just going to be a container where we're going to put error messages, and we can style that later if we want. And then we'll need a button that will say, you know, like create job. All right. So this should look like something. Okay, so we've got our title, software engineer. The type is standard. When we click on the post, or we click on the button, we're sending a post request to /jobs, but that's not supported yet because it doesn't have a post route. But also we need to do a couple of things before we actually send the data to create the job. We don't want to create the job right away because first we need to handle payment. So we want to, at this point, right when the button is clicked, we want to intercept submission of the form with JavaScript. And then we're going to use JavaScript to first call out to our server with Ajax. So we're going to make an asynchronous call with JavaScript to our server to create a payment intent, which will return the ID of the payment intent and the client secret for the payment intent, which is the client secret is used to do secure customer authentication. This is something that's really important in Europe. And so the way this works is we will install a couple of things. So first we need to include Stripe.js in our page. So we'll include Stripe.js. Then we're going to write just an inline script here to implement the client-side JavaScript that we're going to use to handle this page. Yeah, okay. So first we're going to initialize an instance of Stripe. This is going to be the like client-side library that we're going to use. And then the next thing we want to do is initialize an instance of elements. We're going to create a new card element, and we're going to mount it to this card element field. So we have the card element div that has that ID card element, and now we're mounting our card element from Stripe.js to that div so that it appears as a card input field there. All right, so the next thing we want to do, actually, if we just refresh the page, we can see that now we should have a card element in here. So we have this card number that we can populate with our, you know, credit card number. And then when we click create job, it still doesn't do anything because we have to implement the click handler in the form submission. So we want to grab reference to a couple things. One is the form. So let's grab reference to the form. Job create form. And then on submit of the form, we want to prevent default. So we don't want to actually want to submit the form. And the very first thing we want to do is create a payment intent. So we're going to implement this function, create payment intent. Okay, and this is going to call out to our server to create a payment intent and then return the result. So we're going to call, we'll make a new Ajax route that it's nested under jobs, and we're just going to call it create payment intent, just like this. And we need to pass a few things back to the server. So I am going to, stringify the title and the type of the job. I'll just call this job type because sometimes the name type, depending on the language, there's like weird things that happen. So I'm going to call it job type. And then here we probably want to grab, in addition to the form, we also want to grab reference to, let's just keep these all together. So title is the title input, and then job type is going to be in the job. I can't remember if I named it type input. Yeah. Okay, so we're by saying document.getElement by ID, we're grabbing reference to these form element or the form fields, the input fields that are on the page, and then we can use those to interact with the data. So when the create payment intent function is called, we want to make a post request to our server. So we can use fetch, and we specify the path that we want to make the request to, the type of HTTP request we want to make, in this case post, some headers, and then the body that we want to send. So in this case, the body that we're sending here is title.value and job type.value. But we need a couple other things here. So in order for this to work with Laravel, it's expecting that we're going to pass the CSRF token here, and I'm just going to try to remember what the key is for this. Right, okay. So the header is going to be inside of X CSRF token, and we can get that out of that hidden input field. So we can say document.get elements by name underscore token, and there's only one on the page, so we'll just index into that with 0 and then return the value for that hidden input field. The next thing is that when we use the Laravel validators, if we're making an AJAX request and we're submitting, or like the requested header is XML HTTP request, which is the kind of thing that we're submitting, then the validator does something special. It will run the validations and return the error as JSON. Otherwise, it's going to return a 302 and sort of redirect to a different page. There's a couple of like magic things that happen inside of Laravel when running validations. So it tries to determine, are you making this request with HTML HTML, and if so, we're going to return the HTML response. If it's a request with JSON, we're going to return the JSON response. So you don't have to kind of like figure that out. So the trick here is we have to pass this header X requested with, and once we do this, XML HTTP request, then we will get any errors that happen as part of form validation will be returned as JSON. So what's happening here is we're making an HTTP request, we're making a post request, we're saying it's application JSON, we're passing the CSRF token so that we are confirming that it's like valid, it's from our own domain, etc. And then we're specifying that it's an XML HTTP request so that any errors that happen when validating this form data will come back as JSON. So what's happening is we want to make sure that, for instance, the job title and the job type are populated, and if they are, then we want to like allow this to continue. Okay, so then the result or the return of fetch is a promise that will resolve with this response object that has a method called JSON on it that you can call that will return the JSON for that object. So this create payment intent function should return a promise that we can then handle, and let's see, so we can call .then and pass in a function that will take in the actual payment intent. Okay, so here we can just like console.log, created payment intent, and we can just stringify the result so that we can see this in the console. Okay. So if we refresh the page here and try this again, oh, it's still going to fail because we haven't implemented this route. Let's just go throw that together real quick. All right, so if we go to the routes again, here we want to add another route. This one's going to be a post route to create payment intent. Create payment intent. And it will belong in, or it lives in, job controller. So we're going to add a new function here right under create public function create payment intent, and that will take in the request. And the job of this function is just to create the payment intent. So we need to do a couple things. So actually, yeah, so we want to do like one, validate form data, and 2, create payment intent. And then finally, we're going to return client secret and payment intent ID. So in order to validate the form data, let's see, what is it that we need to do? So Laravel validation, let's see, request, validate. So there's something like this that happens, and this will tell you if things are valid or not. So you can, there's a whole bunch of different configurations, so you can set it to do fancy things. Because we're going to reuse this form validation in both the create payment intent method and the store method, I'm going to move this into a private function. So I'm just going to call this something like function validate job data, and this will take in the request, and it will just return this thing. And for now, we'll just validate that the title is required. You can add other validations if you want later, but this is what we'll kind of start with. So number 1, validate the form data. So we're going to say like valid, or this validate job data, pass in the request. All right, so that should work for that. Number 2 is create the payment intent. In order to create the payment intent, we want to call it to Stripe to make an API request to Stripe with the Stripe PHP library. We can say something like Stripe payment intent create, and then we want to pass in the amount that we want to charge. For now, we'll just charge $10. And okay, and then we want to store the result of this API call into a payment intent variable, and then here we want to return the client secret. So return, oh, how does this work? Okay, so let's see. JSON responses. So we want to return a JSON response, and Laravel JSON response. There should be something in here. Okay, cool. So this is how you send a JSON response. Return response with some data. So we want to pass the client secret, which is going to be payment intent client secret, and we want to pass the ID. So we'll just pass payment intent ID. And the point of passing the ID back is so that we can store it with our job. That way we can use webhooks, and if we need to pull the status of the payment intent, we can retrieve the payment intent and check to make sure that it's succeeded and it's paid, etc. So we're going to pass that to the client just so that we can kind of like keep reference to the payment intent that we're working with. Okay, there's one other thing we need to do, and that is Stripe set API key. I'm not 100% sure this is the right place to do this, but this will work because this is right before we're making the API request. So I think we can do services.stripe.secret here. That should give us the secret key. And then I forgot actually to install Stripe PHP. So composer require Stripe PHP should require that. And then I don't know if I need to, but I'm going to restart the server because I kind of expect that might be one of the requirements. Okay, it's still installing. What do we got to do next? We might need to, so we also need to make a model for actually storing our job. Okay, so we'll restart the server. If we go back here and refresh the page, unexpected colon in jobs new. Okay. Job controller, unexpected colon. Set, I think that's 2 colons. Let's see. Refresh. Okay, awesome. This is such a nice development experience. It feels very much like Rails to me. Okay, so we've got our form filling out here. Let's just make sure that our network call to create the payment intent is returning what we expect. So I'm going to go to the network tab and then click on the no smoking sign to clear out all the requests. And then I'm going to click create. And I have an error, get elements by name is not a function. So that's in our client. Create blade PHP. Get get elements by name, refresh. Enter a card, click create. Okay, so we're making the request to create the payment intent. We are passing the job type standard title software engineer. And the preview that we get back is this client secret that looks exactly like a payment intent client secret. And we get the ID of the payment intent. So the data that we got back is right. We're creating the payment intent correctly. At this point, things are looking good. Now, worth noting, the payment intent doesn't actually collect payment until it's confirmed and the status is succeeded. So right now, we have just created a payment intent that's waiting to be confirmed. So now the next step here is that we want to pass this client secret along with reference to the card element into confirm card payment, which is the method in Stripe.js that will walk us through the secure customer authentication flow. All right, so in order to do that, let's go back to our client here. So we have confirmed, or we created the payment intent, and we should have seen in the log that, yeah, it created a payment intent and there was the output. Okay, so the next step is that we want to confirm. Actually, before we go beyond that, let's actually try this without a title. So if we wipe out the title and click create, you'll notice that we have now an error with our network request. That's good. We got back a status of 422, totally expected. And if we go to the preview tab for that, the data that we got back was this JSON blob that has a message that says the data was given as invalid, and then this errors object, JSON object, that has the specific thing that failed validation. So this tells us that the title field is required because we didn't fill in the title field. So that's super fun, very cool, really handy. And so what we want to do next is try to figure out how to like print these errors out somewhere here on the form. So if payment intent.errors, then we want to like show the errors, else we want to keep going. So we will say show errors. We'll make a new method and we'll pass in the payment intent errors that we got here. Okay, so how do we want to do this? We've got this div for error messages. Let's use that. I'm gonna grab reference to the error messages div. And for now, I'm not gonna make it pretty. I'm just gonna dump it all in there. So error messages.inner text is equal to json.stringify errors. Okay, so if we refresh this page, wipe out the title, click create. Okay, so it printed it out. It's there. Title, the title field is required. So if we wanted to like make this prettier, we could say something like, you know, if errors.title, then we want to like find the title field. So we've actually already got the title input, right? So we could add a class to the title. Is invalid or something. Okay, so then if we click create, oh, add class is not, how do you add a class? Have to add class to input HTML. Mozilla class list, okay. Class list.add, all right, so we find it and we say class list.add. All right, refresh the page, remove the title, create a job. And then if we look at this input, you'll notice that it has a new class is invalid. So you could style that by saying, you know, like if the if it was is invalid, then make it like color red or something. Nope. Background color red. I don't know. You can style this however you want, but that's kind of like the idea is that you could find the specific error that's happening and then highlight the specific class that's having the error. And then if you wanted to get really fancy, you could have like, if the errors have a title, then not only add the class that it's invalid, but also maybe update a span that's next to it. So if you had, for instance, a span here, you can have like span ID title error. And yeah, okay, so then we can come down here and say like title error dot inner text is equal to errors dot title 0, or join. So errors.title is going to be a list of strings. It's a list of strings here. You can see that here. Errors.title is a list of strings. So we're going to just join those together with commas. Actually, let's just join them together with spaces because they are complete sentences. And we'll set that as the inner text. So now let's add a style for is invalid just for fun. Okay. Background color red. Okay, so if we refresh the page, if we remove the title and say create job, the title field is required and it's red. Okay, we'll fill it back in, create job. And now we no longer have that error, but we're not like clearing it. So you might want to add like, you know, some logic to remove the errors after they've been added. Which you could do something like error messages dot inner text equals something like that. You could find all the classes that are invalid and remove them. This is really a little bit out of scope, so I'm going to keep going. So the next thing we want to do is, if there are no errors with creating our payment intent, the next step is to confirm the payment intent. So I'm going to call another function confirm payment intent. And that will also return a promise. So it's going to look like this: function confirm payment intent. And that was actually going to take in the payment intent. And we're going to use the card element here in order to confirm it. So we're going to say return. Actually, let's go look at what this looks like. So within the Stripe docs, actually, the JS reference, we want to find confirm card payment. So it takes in the payment intent's client secret. We have that string, and then it takes in this sort of object block that has the payment method. So I'm going to copy that and say stripe.confirm payment, confirm card payment. And the first argument is payment intent.client secret. And the second argument is this big options object that for now, we don't have billing details. We're just going to pass just the card element. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that you could pass here to confirm the card payment, but I'm just going to pass this for now. And I'm returning it because confirm card payment returns a promise that we can call then on to handle the rest of our setup here. So we're going to confirm the payment intent and then pass in the payment intent. And then we want to say .then. After we've confirmed the payment intent, we want to actually submit the form. Okay, the other thing we want to do before we go, yeah, let's just see how this goes. All right, so if we go back over here, refresh the page, add a bunch of card details, click create job, submit form is not defined. Form.submit. Okay. let's actually add some breakpoints too. So just so we can see like what's going on. So within the form submit, this is kind of like our top level thing that's controlling all the API requests that are being made. So the very first thing we do is we make a request to create a payment intent. And then depending on what returns, if we have an error, then we're going to show the errors. Otherwise, we're going to try to confirm the payment intent. And if we confirm the payment intent successfully, then we want to submit the form. So let's click create. So we're going to create the payment intent, and then we're going to get back the result. Create the payment intent. It comes back. It doesn't have errors. It has instead a client secret and an ID. Okay. And so we're going to go into this else block. And now we're going to confirm the payment intent. And because I'm using the test card that does not require SCA, confirmation does not require any next actions and does not pop a modal. And then finally we're going to call submit form, which will submit the form and make a post request to /jobs, which we haven't actually implemented yet. So there's a couple of things. Yeah. So let's go to the routes to add this, so we can have a post to /jobs that goes to store, I believe, job controller, store. Yeah. So store should just create the job. So we want to validate the job data again. Validate the job data. Within the store function, we also want to create an instance of a model and then return it, but we can do that in another thing. So for now, we'll just return store as a string. So refresh the page. Okay, I'm going to use an SCA card this time. If you go to the stripe.com/docs/testing, there's a whole bunch of different cards here. When you're working with SCA, you want to try the regulatory test card numbers. Specifically, this is a good one, 4000 to 3155. Okay. Okay. Okay, so I'm using this 3155 number to try to test out SCA. So that opens our secure customer authentication modal. That's what confirm card payment does here. So on line 71, we're calling stripe.confirm card payment. If the card requires secure customer authentication, this modal will be popped when we call Stripe conferred card payment. This will also tokenize the card details that are stored in that in the card element. So now we click complete card authentication, and we are then submitting the form, I believe. So let's try this again, refresh. Okay. Complete. And yeah, so now we're attempting to submit the form. So we're going to click form.submit, and I just want to make sure that the form action method post. Okay, so this should actually submit the form. And let's see what happens. If we go to the network tab, clear it, sources, click play. I believe that should have created a post request to submit the form. What is going on here? Okay, so we got a 302 and we were redirected back. So let's see what's going on here. We might not have the right names on our form elements. So, right, yeah, okay. So this title doesn't have the name input or the name attribute. And job type. Okay. And furthermore, I want to add a hidden input here to contain the ID of the payment intent. And we will set that value right before we submit. No, after we create the payment intent, we'll set it. So okay, so we just want to store the ID there so that we can pass that back when we're creating the job. So let's try this again. Use our SCA test card. It should open a modal. Payment intent input is not defined. Payment intent input. Create the job. Confirm. Complete authentication. Submit the form. Boom. Now we're in store. So we're looking great. Now we need to actually create the model that has that title and the payment intent ID. So we're going to go back to our job controller. And in the store method here, we want to create a new my job, which is going to be like a new my app, my job. I don't want to call it job because job is often used for like background jobs. And so I don't want to have a name conflict just in case that's something that's used by someone else. So I'm going to say my job and then my job.save to save the model. And then we're going to return as to JSON, I think maybe should work to like return the JSON for the job. The title is going to be inside request title, and the job type is going to be in request job type, and payment intent is going to be in request payment intent. All right, so I don't actually have a model called my job. So let's go add that. I think, okay, so PHP artisan make model, and then you give it the name of the model, and then you can do -m for it to create the database migrations for you. So I'm going to say create my job table, and then here I want to add some columns. So table string for the title and string for the payment intent and for the job type. I'm just going to make them all strings. You likely want to have better conventions than that. PHP artisan migrate. Cross your fingers. Hope everything works. Okay, so we've got a new title, or we've got a new model. So let's see if submitting our thing here. Let's see. So create the job. Let's see. App my job is not found. My job. App my job. That's where it is. Maybe I did something wrong in job controller. Maybe this needs to be prefixed with a slash. Not sure entirely, but let's go back, refresh, create a job. Okay, so it created the job. The title is software engineer. The job type is standard. The payment intent ID is there. PI underscore blah, blah, blah. Tells us when it was updated and created. That's handy. And we have an ID for the job. So this is how you can quickly spin up and take payment with Laravel in an SCA friendly way, kind of like going through and handling validations also. So if we don't have a title here, but we do fill in the card, for instance, we try to create the job. Title field's required. It yells at us and prints out some stuff about that. Yeah, so that is a good place to get started. Again, hopefully this was helpful. And Laravel is a really cool framework. I think it's super fun. It is really handy and does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And yeah, hopefully that was a good intro to how to take payment with Stripe. We didn't actually show what the payment intents look like in the dashboard, but that should work. All right.